Lighter than silk, harder than iron as weaponry, it would best our proudest blades.
Amazon's The Rings of Power digs into the history of Mithril, answering 6 unresolved mysteries from The Lord of the Rings. The coveted substance known as Mithril appears in both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Ring, with Bilbo Baggins plucking a Mithril shirt from Smaug's treasure hoard in Erebor and passing it down to nephew Frodo for his quest to destroy the One Ring. Gandalf describes Mithril as a treasure found by the dwarves in Moria, mined almost to the point of exhaustion. The operation awoke Moria's sleeping Balrog, and the entire kingdom of Khazad-dûm quickly fell, meaning Mithril in Middle-earth became exceedingly rare, since it couldn't be found anywhere else. More than 3,000 years earlier, The Rings of Power explains how the landscape of the Lord of the Rings came to pass, charting the creation of the One Ring, the founding of Mordor, and the early years of ancient characters such as Elrond and Galadriel. The Rings of Power also recounts the origin of Mithril, with Robert Aramayo's Elrond arriving in Moria shortly after Durin IV and co. unearthed their very first nugget. With The Lord of the Rings only briefly touching upon Mithril's history, The Rings of Power gets to fill some gaps. Here's every gem Durin and Elrond dug out of the caverns of Middle-earth's history books. 1. The Doors of Durin's Origin. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo and his entourage enter Moria through the West Gate. This elaborate and magical portal requires a verbal password to unlock. Celebrimbor himself created the door, which is inlaid with Ithildam-type Mithril. However, The Rings of Power depicts the gate's earlier appearance, when it was made entirely of stone and relied on manual effort rather than magic for security. With the 4th episode of The Rings of Power confirming that Mithril is flowing from Moria's veins and Elrond establishing a friendship with Eregion, it is only a matter of time before work on the Doors of Durin gets underway. 2. Releasing the Balrog could have been avoided. Gandalf tells the warning story of Durin's bane in the Fellowship of the Ring. Mithril had become so scarce by the start of the Third Age and Durin reigned that Moria's miners had to dig ever deeper to uncover fresh lodes. Their avarice unleashed the Balrog from the depths of Moria and destroyed Khazad-dûm completely. That story is given a new twist by the Rings of Power, which makes the dwarves' greed seem worse in hindsight. Elrond is informed by Durin that mining for Mithril is far riskier than simple digging because 3 dwarves nearly lost their lives in a sad accident. Durin shuts the Mithril operation down completely as a result, but the prevalence of the silver stuff in Tolkien's Third Age means digging will inevitably resume sooner or later. Had Moria's dwarves simply heeded King Durin III's caution and left Mithril well enough alone, much pain and bloodshed could have been avoided. 3. When the dwarves found Mithril in Moria. The mountain kingdom of Moria existed long before the originally age, so the history of the dwarves there goes back millennia. J.R.R. Tolkien does not specifically state when the dwarves first found Moria's treasures of Mithril. According to the Rings of Power canon, Mithril was apparently found around the middle of the Second Age, under Durin III's rule, before the actual Rings of Power were created. Despite the fact that this information is undoubtedly insightful, Amazon's timeline clashes strangely with Tolkien's. Tolkien also says that Eregion was established specifically because the elves heard reports about an exciting new find in Moria. The legendary author's The Lord of the Rings appendices discreetly indicate that Mithril was truly discovered during the early Second Age. With Eregion already well established in the Rings of Power, Mithril seems to have been uncovered a little later than it should have been, a consequence, no doubt, of Amazon bunching centuries of Second Age lore together. 4. Why was Mithril so important to the dwarves? The greed issue facing the dwarves is openly discussed in The Lord of the Rings. In The Hobbit, there is seldom a chapter that goes by without mentioning how the race's infatuation with glittering stones keeps killing them. Dwarves are naturally inclined to jeopardize their own safety in order to obtain a sliver of Mithril, so the Rings of Power doesn't need to explain why. However, Durin IV expresses to Elrond his optimism that Mithril will eventually bring the dwarves into the fold of Middle-earth. He isn't just seeing the dwarfish equivalent of dollar signs or getting caught in its glowing prettiness. Durin sees Mithril as a brighter future for his kingdom, allowing them to create weapons and architecture that surpasses the loftier races of elves and men. Durin's reasoning taps into J.R.R. Tolkien's origin story for the dwarf. The race wasn't created by Eru Ilúvatar, so it was destined to always be inferior. Mithril could have redressed the balance. 5. How the dwarves first detected Mithril in Moria. Less disruptive to the Lord of the Rings mythology is the Rings of Power's explanation for how Mithril was initially discovered. J.R.R. Tolkien merely writes that Durin's folk found this valuable treasure deep within Moria's mountainous caverns and prized it above the usual gems and minerals they excavated. The Rings of Power adds a little color to that story, explaining how dwarf singers such as Dissay used their echoing voices as a rudimentary sonar system to detect which spots are worth mining. It was Desaz's uncanny vocal skills that pinpointed an unusual mineral hiding beneath the rock, and the dwarves' lucrative mithril business soon began in earnest. 6. How other races learned about mithril. Naturally, the dwarves eventually freely trade their mithril, and the elves developed their own variant known as Ithilda. But when the Rings of Power starts, mithril is Moria's biggest secret, and Durin IV is terrified that the elves of her region might even grow suspicious of its presence. Although there is still much work to be done in establishing trust between the races, the Rings of Power makes a significant first step in that direction when Durin IV gives Elrond a piece of mithril as a sign of goodwill. Although the elf makes a pledge to keep the information private, this one-sided exchange is the first instance of Moria sharing its greatest asset with Telves, as a partnership that will persist for the duration of the Second Age. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to comment, subscribe, and give us a like.